Hi, everyone, or should I say, Dzień dobry, jak się masz? My name is Henry Gordon Smith, and it's a great honor today to give this presentation. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I hope to give you some exciting insights about urban agriculture and the things that I've learned along my journey. And also I want to give a big thanks to Sky for organizing this. So to begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey. I think it should hopefully be inspiring to all of you interested in urban agriculture, greenhouses, vertical farming. That's going to be chapter 1 of the presentation. Chapter 2 is going to talk about Agritecture consulting, what we do and the kind of work we consult on and some examples. And chapter 3 is going to be a presentation of where we're going next as a company and a demonstration of our online farm design platform, our software for business planning for urban agriculture. So this is exciting because I've never demoed this virtually yet, and this is actually one of the first demos that's happening as part of a European tour that I'm doing. Today I'm calling you from London, England, and as I said, I'm traveling around Europe giving presentations about our work, but also helping architecture firms, universities, government institutions understand how urban agriculture can play a role in resilient food systems. So let's get started. First of all, let's talk about how I found my global challenge and hopefully inspire you as well to think about it. I was born in Hong Kong. My father is a civil engineer. And growing up in Hong Kong, which is one of the densest cities on earth, I learned how cities can be creative about maximizing space, integrating parks, and making sure that citizens can be happy. But obviously, having grown up in Hong Kong, I didn't grow up with a green thumb. I grew up with a very urban upbringing, very much focused on cities. But I was very passionate about the future of cities from a very early age. At the age of 6, we moved to Tokyo, another very dense and high-tech city. And in Tokyo, I started to observe how technology can communicate to us in the urban environment, how buildings can kind of talk to us, how efficiency can be managed, and certainly the engineering and technology in electronics in Japan was an inspiration to me from an early age. When I was 16 years old, I moved to another mega city, Moscow, Russia, and there I learned a lot about how buildings perform in cold climates and some of the waste that can exist. And also how in big cities, how there can be a really major divide between rich and poor. I'm giving you this background because I think it's going to show how our experience can lend ourselves to find global challenges around us. When I was 18, I moved to Canada. I wanted to go to a country and a city that had a lot of nature in it, and I chose to go to the University of British Columbia. I was studying political science, but in that study, I started looking at food security and water security. And one of the things I was looking at is how cities could be leaders in urban agriculture or in any kind of policy related to sustainability. And Vancouver has a plan to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. This is a citywide initiative supported by the mayor, supported by various provincial funding as well. And the plan is really strong. It has a lot of plans for bikeways, plans for waste management, plans for water management. It even has plans for solar panels and EV vehicles in it. But what it doesn't have is any plan to protect the food system for future generations. So I found this as a really interesting gap. If cities are consuming food, why aren't they part of planning food systems? When we used to develop cities, we used to always plan food systems with our cities. And so I started looking into this deeper and I started talking to some political leaders in Vancouver, and I found they just simply didn't understand what urban agriculture was, how much does it cost, how much space do I need, what are the models for success, how does it affect zoning and permitting. What I also found is that entrepreneurs were very interested in the subject. There were waiting lists for community gardens. There were people who wanted to learn about this in school. There were different startups that were beginning to explore how technologies like greenhouses and vertical farming could improve the economics of indoor agriculture, or urban agriculture rather. But there were still all these gaps. These two groups weren't talking to each other effectively, and there was a big knowledge gap. So I started in 2010 a blog called Agritecture, where I would essentially visit different farms and I would report on them and try to share kind of a technology agnostic approach to urban agriculture. You know, thinking about all the possible ways we can do this and talking about that in one space. And Agritecture was kind of the first blog that talked about vertical farming, greenhouses, and community gardens all in one place, and did that without pushing or selling any kind of equipment or any one approach. More about teaching a methodology and also talking about failures and challenges. So this is one of the first farms that I visited in 2011. It was actually North America's first commercial vertical farm. It was called Local Garden, and it was about an 800 square meter rooftop greenhouse with a vertical system, as you can see here. And this was pretty innovative in a number of ways, but in the end, it failed. After 1 year, the farm was unsuccessful. It failed because it was over-engineered. There was a big obsession on technology as opposed to actually understanding the right equipment choices. And also it failed because it didn't identify the market properly. As you can see here, it was growing leafy greens and salad mixes, which is very common in vertical farms. But this was located in downtown Vancouver, a very high-end part of the city where there were many restaurants that would pay a premium for specialty herbs, specialty flowers. And in the end, this farm should have focused on diversity and a much more lower tech solution. So in the end, it failed. And so what we really try to do at Agritecture is try to avoid these failures by sharing what worked and what didn't in the past, so that everyone anywhere can be able to be more successful with urban agriculture. So Agritecture's blog was really about gathering knowledge, sharing ideas, and exposing the challenge of rapid urbanization in the face of climate change. By 2050, it's estimated that 80% of our food consumption will happen in cities. So wow, I mean, 80% of the global food is consumed in cities, and yet there are almost no cities globally that have budgets for agriculture, that have departments planning their food system, that have clear strategies to protect their food system. So the risk as urbanization increases is getting higher as these policies and budgets are not in place. And this is what we want to solve. So again, in the past, we always used to plan the places we lived with the resources we needed to survive. And so this is a couple different graphics of New York and Manhattan, how it's changed over time. And basically, there used to be farms all over Manhattan. Now there no longer are. And we can see this with cities across the globe as they've developed. As cities have gotten more advanced, as they've gotten more expensive, we've said that agriculture isn't valuable in the urban context. And we've said that we're going to push agriculture somewhere else and centralize it in what is arguably a more efficient way to grow in some cases, but has consequences because we lose our connection to the food system, we increase food miles, and we also increase the risk as a response to climate change. So let's look at some case studies that are really interesting that demonstrate this problem. So Sydney is really fascinating. Sydney is a city we featured on our podcast, Locally Grown In, which is about urban agriculture in different cities, and it was our first episode. And so 20% of the food consumed in Sydney is grown locally already. And I think that's really high relative to other cities. Melbourne has a very high number as well, but 20% is quite high. So that means 20% of the food consumed is grown within 100 miles of Sydney. But as you can see here, based on the trajectory of urban development, that's going to go down to 6% by 2031. So that's an economic loss, meaning that those farms no longer have their property. There's no longer food production happening. There's no longer jobs in that sector. Sure, they're going to be replaced with housing and real estate, but from a resiliency perspective, that's a big risk. What if the food that we are moving towards, importing towards Sydney in the future starts to be at risk or the prices go up? We've now lost that resilience. Furthermore, it's important that cities do have some kind of knowledge around food production in the face of climate change. That's being lost. What's encouraging is that if Sydney were to get a strategic plan in place for protecting its food system, even with the growth and development of the city and the population growth, 14% of that food production could still exist. 14% could still be local. So, there's an opportunity for cities to actually respond to this and show leadership and protect their food systems, even in the face of rapid development. But the problem really in Sydney is that there's over 30 different municipalities in the city and they need to collaborate. And so I think it's going to be a long time before this actually happens in Sydney. And unfortunately, as is very typical in human society, we allow a lot of suffering to occur before we make rapid change to survive. Toronto is also another interesting case study. Toronto is located in Ontario, a very big and relevant province in Canada. Ontario used to be a net exporter of food. It used to produce more than it imported, export more than it imported. As Toronto is the fastest North America, we've actually encountered that Ontario has become a net importer of food. So similarly here, a lot of the rich agricultural land that was around Toronto has now been developed into suburbs and condos. And what we've done is we've started to create more monoculture in Ontario, which has increased the risk in the system. So there's a big economic cost there. And now the province is having to pay to buy food for this growing city from somewhere else. Will that continue in the future? Will that be possible that we can buy that food at a cheap cost? I think it's a very concerning number and trend that's happening here. Some cities are trying to show a lot of leadership. The UAE has less than 3%, I believe it's even less than 1% arable land that could be used for agriculture, and yet it's a very rapidly growing part of the region. So what they've done is they've created a director, a minister of food security, and what her job is to get the UAE into the top 10 of the food security index. So one way they want to do that is by obviously protecting their supply chain and the contracts they have to buy food from various places, storage of food, but also they want to create a 40% boost in food production locally. This is going to probably most likely happen in greenhouses and vertical farms because the extreme climate in the region doesn't lend itself to a lot of outdoor farming. There's not a lot of water, so you're going to need to have really water efficient systems to achieve this goal. So what's the point of urban agriculture? What can it do? Well, one of the things that urban AgTech can do is it can develop new agricultural talent. I mentioned that earlier. It can create a context for people to learn and grow food. Urban AgTech can also reduce food miles, meaning that this can improve the quality of the food and also reduce waste. And because these farms are closer to the consumer and you can create experiences around the product, they can actually demand a higher price point, whether they're organic or whether they're family owned or local. All of these can suggest that they can get a higher price point. The economic opportunity globally for urban agriculture is significant. It's really valuable. A study last year looked at available spaces in cities around the world and found there's $80 to $160 billion global opportunity for urban agriculture alone. This includes ecosystem services like managing rainwater, biodiversity, reducing urban heat island effect, but it's primarily driven by the fact that this could produce 10% of the global output of legumes, roots and tubers, and vegetable crops. Essentially, a variety of fruits and vegetables could be grown in cities globally, and that could be 10% of our food supply. Now, if we think about the areas around the city, that number could go much, much bigger. So greenhouses near cities, greenhouses in the edges of cities, vertical farms and warehouses near the cities, soil-based farms, agroforestry, various urban deltas. These are all strategies that could actually grow our food consumption to be in the 20% plus globally for vegetables and fruits. And we know we need to eat more of those products too in the face of climate change and limited land. What's been encouraging is that there's some really interesting trends happening that are making this a positive time for urban agriculture. Again, 80% of food consumption is going to happen in cities. Cities are starting to take this a bit more seriously, even though it's a bit slow. That's improving. As I said, local food can get a higher price point. And so we see that consumers in the United States especially are willing to pay more and a premium for local food. There's threats to the supply chain. Recently, a hurricane hit Georgia last year, and farmers lost $4 billion in value because of that hurricane. So moving food closer to cities and into indoor environments will be part of responding to these increased storms as a result of climate change. The growth potential is significant in vertical farming. We're seeing increased growth in the technology and the investment into the space, as you can see from this point and this point. And finally, policy, although it's a bit slow, is speeding up. There's very, very active urban agriculture leadership in Paris, Dubai, Singapore, Toronto, and we have 3 major cities now. Recently, DC joined Philadelphia and the city of Atlanta in having a director of urban agriculture. So let's take a step back and think about what is urban agriculture and one way to frame your thinking. There is not one size fits all when planning urban agriculture, whether you're an entrepreneur or a city. You need to think about the various types of urban agriculture as tools in a toolbox, because there are trade-offs all across this spectrum of technology. You could also look at this as a spectrum of investment. So let's go through it quickly. On the low-tech side, we have city farms, or what I call community gardens rather. And Bushwick City Farm is one example of that. These are gardens that are typically low cost to build. They typically are located in vacant lots. They typically are on the ground. And for example, in New York City, there's about 1,000 of these combined between school community gardens and community gardens. And so what these provide is they provide safe spaces for the neighborhood, green spaces for the neighborhood. They produce food that's often given away or sold at a very inexpensive price. And they also create biodiversity and manage rainwater. They also can reduce the urban heat island effect. Some of the challenges with this model in a city like New York or Warsaw is in the wintertime, they're not going to be very productive. So you don't really have an economic case to build a for-profit business around this. Brooklyn Grange is an example of a for-profit soil-based farm. It's on a rooftop. In the case of soil-based farms, that are on rooftops or in major cities, a big part of your revenue generation is going to come from events. So they have a beautiful location where they can do yoga and they can do weddings and all of that, but they also sell their food. It's estimated about 30 to 40% of their total revenue comes from events, and the rest comes from selling the food product. Again, in the wintertime, some of that production shuts down, and Brooklyn Grange's latest farm actually has a commercial scale greenhouse on the rooftop, and they have 4 locations now. So this is a really good example of a successful, profitable rooftop farm. Rooftop farms are excellent for reducing heat island effect. They're excellent for managing rainwater, especially if they're big, and they can really be an interesting mix of the city. However, they're very difficult unless you have scale. So you need at least half an acre or more, I would say, to have a really commercially viable rooftop soil-based farm. And that's difficult to find rooftops that can support that kind of soil weight in a city. Harlem Grown is an example of a community garden that also has a hydroponic greenhouse. So I won't say much here, but there's basically ideas where you can combine different technologies. And even at the community level, you can do them in a low-tech way. And that's what Harlem Grown has been able to do effectively. Sky Vegetables is a rooftop hydroponic farm in the Bronx. It's about 1,000 square meters. And what they do is they focus on growing basil primarily, and they serve that basil to local distributors, but also a small percentage goes to the building itself. If you Google it, you'll see it's a really interesting building. It's a LEED Platinum structure, affordable housing only, and it has a lot of synergies. So waste heat is used to keep the plants warm in the wintertime, and also in the summertime, the greenhouse provides some insulation, and in the winter as well. Rainwater is also harvested and recycled through the building. Again, rooftop farms need to be quite big. So a rooftop greenhouse, by our economic estimates, should be at least an acre for it to be profitable. So again, very difficult to find properties of that size in cities. AeroFarms represents large-scale vertical farming, which is extremely high-tech, a lot of sensors. There's basically no soil, no sunlight, and ultimate control. You're controlling every single variable from pH to EC to temperature to individual ventilation, microclimates. You're measuring this data, and all of this comes at a very, very high cost. So a city farm might cost you maximum $10 a square foot. A vertical farm like this could cost you $1,500, more than that for one of this many levels. For 4 levels, we typically estimate $250 per square foot for 4 levels of cultivation, including lights, cooling systems, etc. But that does not include the building itself or the improvements to the building. So AeroFarms can produce many, many more cycles of crops throughout the year, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a capital cost, and it comes at a high operational cost with energy. Also, this is not contributing directly to biodiversity. It's not managing rainwater. It's not impacting the community in a very open way as community gardens would. And overall, it has some benefits and some weaknesses. One of the weaknesses, again, is the amount of embodied energy of all this equipment and the carbon footprint if the energy is sourced from a coal plant, for example. So there's pros and cons all across the spectrum. There's different costs. And whenever you visit farm, you should think about the pros and cons of it, and then think about your idea and what is going to be the right fit for your site. That's how you bring architectural thinking to agriculture in the city. Again, here's a quick overview of some of the impacts that urban farms can have. They can have an aesthetic impact. They can have a social impact, maybe integrating immigrants, maybe providing collaboration, language sharing, sharing of culture. Economic impact, jobs, revenue. We see this mostly with the high-tech farms. And environmental impact, as I mentioned, heat island effect, green infrastructure, biodiversity, pollution management, and these typically happen the most directly with low-tech farms on that spectrum. So what Agritecture is doing today is we have built a global team, and we consult and advise on the design, planning, and implementation of urban agriculture projects of any kind. Our mission is to empower anyone, anywhere, to be able to develop feasible urban farming solutions, and we basically turn our clients' ideas into practical and sustainable realities. This is a sample of one of our methodologies for feasibility studies. So if you wanted to start a vertical farm, we recommend you go through these steps. Concept development means exploring all the possible options. Market research involves talking to your potential customers and getting pricing. Farm design is detailed CAD drawings of farms. Economic analysis is building economic models. And implementation is what is the implementation strategy for that. This is our team. You can see more about our team on our website. And we work with mostly entrepreneurs and cities and corporations. Our work is different with both groups. Entrepreneurs, mostly it's planning their farms. cities and corporations, it's often strategies on how to think about all these farming systems together. To date, we've had some really exciting progress with over 110 consultations in over 40 cities and over 20 countries. This variety makes us extremely able to understand the challenges and opportunities for production of food in any city around the world. And we continue to expand very actively into Asia as we try to grow our representation there. And actually, it's not listed here, but we have one client recently in Africa, and we're trying to do more work in South America as well. But as a small team, I'm very proud of what my team has been able to achieve and the exciting data that we've been able to develop as we execute these projects. Here's some simple case studies that we've worked on. One is FarmOne. It's Manhattan's first commercial vertical farm. It's about 120 square meters. It's located in a basement in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Manhattan, Tribeca. And what they do is they grow and sell rare culinary herbs and flowers to restaurants, mostly Michelin star restaurants. So it's not feeding the world, but what it does is it provides these restaurants with an alternative to importing product in refrigerated trucks and planes, which high-end restaurants often do. Square Roots is Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother's project in vertical farming, along with Tobias Peggs. They hired us to design a training curriculum for 6 weeks to teach entrepreneurs how to produce in vertical farms. And those entrepreneurs had 1 year to develop a business around that. And essentially they had this container to themselves, and they would grow different herbs and leafy greens and sell them at an on-site market, as well as distributing them to different customers. Their model has shifted a little bit as they've expanded and raised more money. We're very happy that they've been successful, and it's exciting to see how their model is shifting. Overall, containers can be interesting for quick deployability, which is what was important to Square Roots, but we don't find containers are very effective from an efficiency perspective, simply because you're forcing a lot of equipment into a small space. So if you're motivated by low carbon footprint and a lot of efficiency, containers are not something I would typically recommend, but we can answer those questions one-on-one later. The city of Paris, I was able to work with them and advising them on their Paris Culture project, which is essentially a project, a competition to accelerate urban agriculture, where they pick sites and urban farmers apply for those sites with business plans. They've been able to achieve significant growth, and I invite you to look at that website on what they've achieved. And there's a variety of farms, from organic rooftop farms to mushroom farms to aquaculture to indoor hydroponic farms. So it's really, really quite a variety. And Paris is probably the global leader in urban agriculture entrepreneurship now. Toronto, we worked with a company called Sidewalk Labs. And what they did is they were developing a part of the waterfront into a smart city. And they wanted to integrate agriculture without using any valuable real estate, meaning residential or commercial real estate. So we did this for them by using our scenario planning methodology. And what we did is we designed 11 different models for urban agriculture without taking up any valuable space. And so these included beehives, outdoor orchards, and basement smart community gardens that were IoT empowered. Let's talk about the future I want to see. This is the next chapter of Agritecture. In the future, I want anyone anywhere to turn their ideas for urban agriculture into a reality. I want them to be able to plan it using data, and I want them to be able to build those farms successfully. So what I'm introducing today is Agritecture Designer. It is an online farm design software that allows entrepreneurs anywhere to explore the costs and concepts around urban agriculture to make it more effective and easier for them to get to their next step. So it's the world's first digital planning tool for urban farming entrepreneurs. We're targeting entrepreneurs, but this would also be a benefit to real estate developers, architects, students, even policymakers will benefit from this. And we're just launching in beta, so this isn't public. So this is kind of exclusive for you all, but it's a really exciting next step for us as we democratize the knowledge that we've gained. Hang tight, I've got the demo going here. So this is kind of what it'll look like when you arrive. It's essentially a website that will teach you a little bit about urban agriculture and allow you to build your concept. Unfortunately, the demo is a little slow because I'm recording on Zoom, so this may not work very effectively. So I'll just go through it quickly. Essentially, you're going to be able to access data. It's going to help you save time, autonomy, and make data-driven decisions. There's going to be a first part of the tool, which is a concept development tool that is free. So you can enter in certain information like who you are, or what your goals are. So are you an entrepreneur? What's the goal of your farm? What stage are you at? What do you want to build? What experience do you have? Where is your farm going to be? You can answer questions like what crop you want to grow. And essentially what this is it's a bit of a decision tree that accesses our database of models and allows you to then understand what's been done before that's similar to your idea. So we're trying to get your concept. And this part of the tool is completely free. Okay, so you can enter in your information and you can essentially build up and get a vision report of your idea demonstrated. You can get a plan of your project, how long it's going to take to build it. We'll give you some details on months. And you're going to get a list of relevant farms to your idea, other farms that have been built that you can learn more about relevant to your idea. After that, you can actually go and build a whole data report. And this is the paid part of the product, but still quite inexpensive as we make it affordable for all. So in this part, it's really going to be about planning your business and estimating your accurate costs of your operation. So when you log in, you can see your vision report and inspiration again. But then what you can do is you can actually build your project, and you can do an unlimited number of projects. You can enter your location, you can name your farm. You can choose between vertical farm and greenhouse. Those are the options we have right now, but we're going to have all kinds of urban ag options available in the future. You can input information on costs related to your business, like the size of the farm or the rent. And we've inputted data on various crops that are typical in urban agriculture, including their yield, their waste, and the various things that they need to survive and be successful as plants. And essentially what you're doing here is you're building a 10-year economic projection of your business, and you're trying to think about what the payback will be. What kind of money do you need to raise, and what are the challenges you're going to face? We're also developing a set of courses to help you understand how to use the tool, how do you do market research, so that when you get this output on your capital cost and your payback and your 10-year operating summary, it's going to be more useful to you to understand that. So for an additional fee, you can take our 6 classes and you can learn more about that. As you can see here, we're going to give you access to the typical percentages for various capital costs. And we're also going to break down the operational cost for you as well. So the next step is really going to be for you to do market research and go to your store and get the exact prices for your crops to refine your financial model even further. And that is the Agritecture Designer. That's the first demonstration. We're going to be adding many more features, but I want to invite you to be one of the first to test it out. You can express interest by going to agritecture.com/designer, enter in your email, and you'll be notified as we release the product to more and more beta users. If you're not invited to be beta, you'll be notified when it's launched. And again, the first part of the tool is free, so there's no reason not to try it out. I really want to thank you all for your time. It's really been exciting to share these ideas with the world. And I think it's really exciting that you're interested in urban agriculture. And I would love to learn more about what your interests are. So if you have questions about urban agriculture, if you have questions about my presentation, you can send me those questions. I think one of the best ways to do it is just send me the questions through Sky, and I'll answer them in a video answer or maybe a written answer, depending on how complicated it is. And so maybe if I can get them all soon after your event, I can have a week and I'll answer those questions for you and hopefully be as helpful as possible. If you're interested in talking to me, you can email me here or you can follow me on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram and Twitter at the Agritech. Thank you so much, and I really wish you guys have a great day. Take care.